Welcome to the Open File Backup Podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Butler.
Hey, Deb.
And that was Marina Pape from WooCommerce. How is it pronounced? Fajr?
Faja. So like, Luke, I am your Faja.
Marina is currently living in London. She works remotely as a brand manager for WooCommerce and is running an online store that helps generate an income for Syrian refugees. We're going to talk to her today about starting WordPress hackathons in Lebanon and how she uses tech and design to connect people and tell their stories. I didn't really meet you. I kind of did. I think I said, "Hey, great talk."
We waved.
Yeah, just like waved each other afterwards. But I kind of met you at a local conference here in Cape Town, which was CMS Africa Summit, and you did a presentation there. And it was definitely one of maybe two presentations at the 2-day conference, which completely blew my mind. And one of the things that really blew my mind about the presentation was your work that you've been doing in Lebanon. So for those who don't really know, there's a WordPress hackathon here in Cape Town, which was started by Hugh Lashbrook of WooCommerce, and it's called the Do Action Hackathon. And it's where NGOs can have their website completely either redone or completely built an entire day. Marina, you've started the Do Action in Lebanon, right?
I did. Yeah. So that's kind of a crazy story, which kind of started actually long ago when I took a trip there with my best friend. So I did a trip to the Middle East in 2008, which was before there was kind of the war in Syria and stuff like that. So the Middle East was kind of a pretty different place. But even back then, it was kind of tenuous for two young girls to go traveling.
Yeah, right. So like, I mean, out of all the places in the world, you guys decided to go to the Middle East. I mean, was that something you'd always wanted to do, or do you just kind of go, I'll go see what that's like?
I think I've always had a leaning towards things that are slightly off the beaten track. So the idea of going somewhere, I mean, I probably just wanted to sort of test my mum and test some boundaries, but she was very encouraging about the whole thing, actually, surprisingly. But I think a couple of years before that, I was reading something, or I saw a news article, and I just began investigating Lebanon a bit as a country and learning about how, it's kind of this little country in the Middle East. It bordered Israel, it bordered Syria. It was kind of very interestingly located. It had its own internal challenges in terms of having a lot of displaced people. Often the conflict that happened in surrounding countries would end up playing out in the Middle East. So it just sort of caught my attention. It's like, gosh, what an interesting country. And then I decided I wanted to go and do some traveling in that area. So I persuaded my best friend Danae to come with me, and we backpacked from Istanbul across Turkey into Syria. We spent time in Damascus and Latakia and Aleppo, all of which now have kind of changed so much over the last 10 years. Yeah, and then we traveled through Jordan and into Egypt, which is awesome. We actually didn't get into Lebanon because South African passports aren't very well accepted there for some strange reason. But anyway, I then went back again in 2011 and went to Lebanon and did some consulting there, which was a really cool opportunity. And I just love the Middle East. I love how different it feels to South Africa. The sort of two places I bounce between now, like London and Cape Town. And the Middle East is just such a different kettle of fish in terms of the geography, the food, the feeling, the people, the language, everything. So I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah,
I think I get that from. So I love Thailand, and I think a lot of people in South Africa kind of love Thailand, mostly because it's really cheap to travel to. But I love it because it's just so far removed from the culture that we're used to. I mean, the food is completely different. The way that they speak is also very, very different. So I kind of get that about going to Lebanon and the culture change.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. People who sort of take a step towards things that feel different and unfamiliar, and people who prefer to steer clear of that. Like both, I understand why people would lean in either direction, but my inclination is like, I just want to explore things if they feel different and I want to understand them. That was kind of how my interest in Lebanon started. And then in 2017, I decided to go and do some volunteering in Lebanon. I knew of an organization that ran kids clubs for Syrian refugee kids. So I decided I wanted to do that. And then as I was thinking about it, I thought, like that's something I really feel strongly about doing. But actually I spend my 9 to 5 or longer than that doing tech stuff.
Yeah.
So I started thinking, actually, if I'm going to be in this country that I love, why don't I try do something a bit more techie? And then I thought of doing a Do Action Hackathon because I knew Hugh from Automatic, and I so admired the way he got these events running in South Africa. Actually, at the time, they'd only ever run in South Africa. So Do Action charity hackathons now, if you look on the website, they actually run all over.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I told you this. I attended, I think, every Do Action apart from last year. I was out of the country last year, and it's a really, really cool initiative, and it's a very vibey day, and it's a really good idea, and it just seems to work. So yeah, so then you started with Do Action in Lebanon, right?
I did. So I was sort of beginning of the year decided to do this. We decided we would do it in about July. But by the time we got to May, we'd still kind of made no progress on our organizing because with the best will in the world, I was based in London and I'd found a colleague from Automatic called Nabil who was based in Seattle, and he was planning to be in Lebanon anyway, visiting family. So we were like, great, we'll run this together. But what we realized is you really need a local organizer for a Do Action hackathon to come together, just in terms of the connection someone has, speaking Arabic, being there in the mix with everything. So we were actually really getting a bit stuck. And then amazingly, a developer living in Lebanon called Ali Bashir volunteered to host a Do Action hackathon completely separately, which was so kind of serendipitous and awesome. And Hugh pinged me and said, this guy's registered to host one. I suggest you team up. The rest is history. It worked really well.
How many have you had now?
We've had 2. So we did 2017 and 2018. And Ali and I are kind of constantly pinging each other on WhatsApp and chatting about all sorts of things. And I think there are plans to have a third one this year.
So tell me a little bit about, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but it's Fajr, Beirut, and the Fair Project. Tell me a little bit about those two. So
Fajr Beirut kind of came about, my involvement in it came about on that first trip to Lebanon I did to do the Do Action Charity Hackathon. So while I was there, I was at a co-working space because we actually hosted a WooCommerce meetup while I was there as well. So there'd been no WooCommerce or WordPress meetups in Lebanon before in 2017. So we hosted the first WordPress meetup and the first WooCommerce meetup when we were there as well. And at this co-working space, I bumped into this woman who was working with some Syrian refugee women. This lady was called Elizabeth, and she'd seen these women begging on the streets with their kids, and she kind of saw them each day in the same place. And she just thought, like, there's got to be some way or some other thing they could be doing. Her daughter actually was really good at art stuff, and they worked with these ladies to teach them how to hand make notebooks. And these notebooks are beautiful. Like when I met Elizabeth at the co-working space, I bought a bunch of them, and the covers are designed by local Lebanese designers. So they're really, really beautiful. The paper's really high quality. But when I said to Elizabeth, gosh, where are you selling them? Like, how are you getting access to market? She just said, web stuff's not my thing. And that was kind of it. So I kind of pondered this. And then when I got back to London, I just thought, I work for an e-commerce software provider, like join the dots. Ended up building a WooCommerce store, which was wonderful, what we call dog fooding experience. So like actually trying your own products, which is quite revealing sometimes. So I built this online store to give Fajr access to more markets and try and do some online sales. And then we actually ended up setting up a company in the UK to run it because international payments from kind of the world into Lebanon are sometimes quite tricky. So we decided to sort of run it from the UK. And that went live in September last year. So, and my next steps are kind of to try and keep driving online sales and then also try and get them into some coffee shops in and around London.
They're super nice notebooks.
Awesome.
But I don't think I'd be able to order them over here with the postal service here in South Africa.
Oh yeah,
might never get here. For those who are listening, we will be putting links up on the website for it, and definitely go order. They are super nice. So there's obviously something about NGOs that you like working with, right? Why are they so important to you personally?
Yeah, I pondered this a bit, and I think it might be sort of down to my parents, actually, my mum. Since very little, my mum always kind of encouraged me to be thinking about, other people and thinking about how to be helpful and kind. And growing up in South Africa, I think you are aware of the need for NGOs and the role that they play. And and my mom has been involved for the past 16 years or so, involved in an organization in Cape Town called Montebello Design Center, which is like an arts and crafts center where fledgling NGOs or job creation projects can kind of get started. They can have a studio space. So there's like an incredible guy there called Wright from Zimbabwe who does woodcraft. There's a Buchu brewery. There's like clothing manufacturers, there's a potter, there's just all sorts of stuff going on, and it's all kind of job creation stuff. So I've grown up with her doing that and been exposed to that. My involvement in job creation projects through my mum and through Montebello and one business that I worked for 2 years was seeing how when people who don't have work are given productive, creative work to do, there's like an incredible dignity and kind of joy and sense of purpose and energy that people develop.
I just think it's an amazing thing to do, really, and I think it's important that everybody does that in some small way if they possibly can.
And I think sometimes we underestimate what we have. Like the phrase I like think of is like what we have in our hands. So the thing that feels normal to you because you do it every day and it comes naturally to you. There's somebody who doesn't have that, or it doesn't come naturally to them. And I'm a marketer and a branding person. I'm not a developer. So the idea of building a website was still kind of intimidating to me. I just sort of saw that need and stepped into it. But like, I really think that so many people have skills that if they just had the opportunity to be involved in something like a Do Action Hackathon or something like that, they'd be able to make such an impact. And it's so rewarding. Of all the stuff I've done in the last 12 months, I'd say the time that I've given to Faja has been the most rewarding. And doing the hackathon. I mean, I met such amazing people through doing that hackathon. There was like a moment, I mean, at both of them, but where I kind of turned around and like was the only person who didn't speak Arabic, was kind of surrounded by this really diverse, interesting group of people who I never would have met otherwise. And it's such a privilege to have those kind of moments.
Yeah, I mean, there's a WordCamp Beirut, right?
So there's a really thriving WordPress meetup in Beirut that Ali runs. I think WordCamps, they tend to wait until there's like a pretty established WordPress community, and then they kind of host a WordCamp, which is when you're like, our community is like, it's here and it's here to stay kind of thing. So I think Ali's hope is to host a WordCamp sometime soon. But that WordPress Beirut meetup has met every month since the first Do Action charity hackathon. So that's coming up to 2 years.
That's really great.
It's really cool. And like there was one guy particularly, actually I remember him because he was so skeptical at the first one. He was like, what is WordPress? Like, what is this thing? And the second time I saw him, he said he quit his job and he was making a living building WordPress websites for people.
That's really good.
Which is super cool.
Really good. Yeah. Because the tech community is is becoming, or is quite big in Lebanon. So, in saying that, how big is the WordPress community? I think
it's still pretty up and coming. Yeah, I mean, springing to mind and kind of all the statistics I know about like adoption of WooCommerce and sort of adoption of WordPress and stuff. I wouldn't say like the Middle East is like a big booming region for WooCommerce. Partly because online payments is so tricky. Like PayPal doesn't operate in the Middle East or doesn't operate in Lebanon. So there's stuff like that are quite strong blockers, but WordPress does have pretty good adoption. I think it's been used by agencies and stuff like that, but there hasn't really been a meetup or like a sense of the community being rallied. There are quite a lot of like other techie meetups and stuff like that happen. Like there's like an open source meetup that had been running for a while. And
there is a problem. I'm just going to say it. There is a problem when it comes to diversity in tech, and especially when it comes to women in tech. What is it like in the WordPress community? Because I know obviously you might not have exposure to other tech communities in Lebanon, but what is it like in the WordPress community? Is it still a very small ratio of women?
I'd say it still skews male, but that's like my experience of the tech community everywhere, really. I think that there are signs of change. Like a lot of people are getting a lot more proactive in their hiring strategies and things like that, like looking at ways to be more inclusive to women, to other minorities at events. WordPress actually are really, really good like that, I think. Like I think WordCamps, part of it, like you have to provide childcare, things like that, just like tiny things which show like a thoughtfulness to including people who have different needs and stuff like that. But certainly at the WordPress Beirut meetup, there were a good few female designers. So that was awesome to see. And like outside of WordPress, I know that there are quite a lot of initiatives to train women in coding, local women and also people who are displaced. So like Syrian refugee, a real move to try and use tech to to solve some of the challenges that Lebanon's facing. Like I read a really interesting article about using blockchain and like refugee camps and like for helping refugees manage their identities when they don't necessarily carry stuff on them. And so like, yeah, there's people doing really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I watched I can't remember if it was a documentary or a YouTube video. Maybe I was trawling YouTube one night and ended up
likely.
Yeah, I landed on this. But there was a guy who was a Syrian refugee, and obviously he went the route of went through Syria and then went through Lebanon, and I can't remember which other Middle East country, and then eventually he got to Germany.
Wow.
And the Germans really, they invest in the refugees that they did with this guy. They have a specific program where they put them in coding. So he became a developer and managed to graduate from the college that they paid for him to do. And now he's a freelancer as well, which I think is absolutely fantastic. It's quite amazing the amount of thought that is going into technology to help these people who obviously don't really have anything else and don't really have any hope of getting anything else without help.
Yeah. And I mean, like it's challenging, like employment on the go is like tricky. Like I think I mentioned to you that organization I came across called Natakalan, which was they do Arabic lessons online for people, and all of the tutors are refugees who've been displaced. So they might be in all sorts of different places, but they're able to deliver a service through Skype, which makes it accessible, which is quite amazing. I think there are like sometimes challenges with like legislation about people earning money in different countries and things like that. But I think that actually tech's probably a pretty good ways around that. So
yeah, I think it's encouraging. Last question. So diversity in tech is difficult at the moment. Sometimes it feels like it's going a little bit backwards. Sometimes it feels like it's propelling at lightning speed forward. But why do you I personally think diversity in tech, even though there's a lot of awareness that's come about in the last 2 maybe 3 years, it's really got a lot of coverage. But why do you think at the moment tech diversity in tech is so hard?
It's such a tough question. I wonder if there seems to me to be something a bit funny going on in the world, like on like a very macro level at the moment, which is like people are gravitating towards what is known, a little bit like what we were talking earlier about the travel, with things like, I hate to even mention it out loud, but like Brexit and stuff like that. There's kind of this move towards pulling together things that are the same and closing off things that are different, like building walls, as it were. So like, I think, that on a macro level works in opposition to it doesn't set up conditions in which diversity thrive, which requires like a celebration of the other, a stepping towards, difference and things like that. And I think the tech's doing okay. And like, I think hiring has a lot to do with it, being like really, really determined, like as a company, to make sure that you are making your company like friendly to people from all different countries. And also like I think to acknowledge that we all have room to grow in our own thinking on diversity. Like what I think is diverse might be completely backwards for someone else, and they've learned lessons that I need to learn from. So I think like, I don't know, being really determined to keep advancing personally, and like being really open to hearing ways in which you're being narrow-minded yourself, that's kind of all any individual can do. And then I think companies and organizations have a responsibility to lead the way.
Yeah, I mean, I was involved in the organizing of WordCamp Cape Town last year, and their slogan was, "We want to be more diverse." So when they did the organizer call, they were like, "Can we be diverse?" Because it's Jonathan that organized it, Jonathan Basinger, and he put a photo up of the year before's, so it would have been 2017. Organizing team, and the slogan was something like, "This is just too white and too male. Like we need for this to be a lot more diverse," which it was, but also not in terms of just the organizing. It's also in terms of the speakers. The speakers need to be a little bit more diverse, and not just more diverse in terms of gender, but more diverse in terms of people coming from different cultures and different races. And I feel like there's a huge surge at the moment when it comes to conferences, in terms of, we need to be more diverse, but there are still a few that I think are holding on very tight into not being diverse and not putting their
conferences.
Yeah. And not putting their thought processes in, if we do this is actually going to exclude people rather than include people.
I mean, that's challenging. I mean, I think people who are aware of stuff can share resources to like equip and enable others. And then it's like up to people to step towards that. But like, even for CMS Africa, like, to give a shout out to Joop Thomas, who's been really involved with organizing that right from the beginning. He was actually meant to be speaking, and he said to the organizers, like, I want Marina to speak instead of me, because looking at that crowd, it's a very male lineup. Yeah. So I think that's an example of someone making a sacrifice, because I'm sure he would have loved to speak. Yeah. So I think diversity probably will ask for a bit of sacrifice, and like, we've got to be willing to do that when it comes to us, or when we spot things.
Yeah, I think it's a case of there is allies out there, and I think the allies need to just keep on speaking up and keep on just being an example as much as they possibly can. Women and people of color can stand up and say, hey, we want things to be more diverse, but at the end of the day, I personally think it's more the allies that will make the difference.
That's interesting.
And
I think also, like, doing things in like a sort of a gentle spirit, it's really hard to do that when it's things that you feel strongly about. But I think that the topic of diversity can be really scary for people. So people who are would-be allies get so freaked out that they're going to be outed or named and shamed or kind of revealed to be non-inclusive in their thinking, that it can be a really scary thing for people. So something that I try to be so open and to say to people, if I ever say or do something that is non-inclusive, like, tell me, which is sometimes hard to hear. But I think like sort of inviting that feedback and giving it to other people kindly is like a way we can keep making things more diverse, as opposed to it becoming like finger pointing and scary.
You've been listening to Open File Backup with me, Deb. My guest this week was Marina Pape. You'll find all the links mentioned in this interview in the episode description, as well as on the website. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube under the handle Open File Backup, or one word. You'll find all the latest episodes and news on there. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a rating. And if you have any comments on this episode or any other episode, you can email us at openfilebackup@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Theme music was composed by myself, editing was done by myself with the help of Joe Jackson. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.